Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀 Office Hours. Today is the 19th of July, and we are kicking off 𝗨𝗃𝗀 Office Hours 68. So I'm seeing a couple of new faces in here. So for any of you who are new, welcome. And just to let you know, we love participation. So if you want to get involved in today's conversation, please do via voice, either raise your hand or write in the text chat, and we'll try to get you on stage so you can ask your question, as today's conversation will be very engaging. Just as a reminder, this is recorded and will go onto YouTube. So, if you don't want to have your name or voice out there in the ether, please just keep that top of mind. So today's agenda is very exciting, as I mentioned, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into it. We also have a POAP that I should let you guys know about. We distribute POAPs at the end of every episode just to say thank you for everyone's attendance. And so with that, I'm going to move into the opening remarks. So I like to listen to the GRT IQ podcast, and this week's podcast was with 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗀. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So as many of you know, he is an active, well-known contributor to the Graph ecosystem. He's a delegator, curator, subgraph developer, technical writer, and soon to be indexer. That's a lot of things to do for one individual. And so, he's contributed to the Graph Journals, Curation Station, and Developer DAO. And this episode was really interesting, actually, because I did not know this until listening to the episode, but Ahmed has a really interesting personal story of how he's overcome many trials and tribulations to get to where he is right now. He grew up in Syria and spoke a bit about what it was like and how he is a relentless learner and how that's led him to getting to where he is right now. Very inspiring story. If you guys want to have a listen to that, I highly recommend doing so. So that's episode 73. The link will be in the agenda, so please do check it out if you so desire. So that's it for opening remarks, very brief, and I'm going to move it on to Anna for Repo Watch.
Hello, everyone. Normally in this section, in the Repo Watch, we talk about all of the latest updates to major blockchain clients and also latest updates to the graph stack. However, this week we haven't had any new releases, so I'd like to invite you to go to the agenda if you want to see the latest releases for all of the clients. And apart from that, I would like to hand it back to the community to ask if anyone would wants to share any experiences with any of the clients, any bugs, any issues that have come up over the last week.
I think we've had various indexers report kind of different types of challenges with the latest Aragon Alpha releases. Some of that has been documented in the Aragon channel in Discord. So if you're an indexer, you can follow along there. I don't think we've come to any particular conclusion about whether, it's linked to a specific set of alpha versions or whether those issues have been fixed yet. But it's worth knowing that is going on. I think the primary issue that indexers have seen is that when indexing against Aragon Alpha, sometimes subgraphs will just stop syncing. And some indexers report that restarting their graph node or their Aragon node fixes it, but that doesn't seem to be a universal fix. So we'll keep you updated.
Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead, Kai.
Which versions were indexers seeing the subgraph halting behavior?
Various versions of... Sorry, Anna.
I was just going to say that the latest version of Aragon is version 0702 alpha.
Yeah, so I think the reports have been across various versions of alpha. At GraphUps, we're still using the last beta release of Aragon 1 for indexing, and that continues to operate without trouble.
Yeah, we moved over to Aragon Alpha for most of our nodes. Some of them still aren't synced yet, so I'm wondering if that's kind of the same sort of behavior that everybody else is seeing. Was it the Aragon node that stopped synchronizing, or the subgraph itself?
Subgraph.
Got it.
And I'm sure the 𝗟𝗀 team will push a new release very soon, since so many indexers are having issues with the alpha versions. This is it for Repo Watch this week. Very light, but back to you, Abel.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to take this opportunity to hand it over to Juan, who's going to take us into Protocol Watch.
Thank you. So it seems like everyone is in Paris for the Ethereum ecosystem. But anyways, that's not the picture. In contrast, Protocol Watch has a ton of stuff to cover this week. I'm gonna make it extremely brief because otherwise we would be here the whole hour. So going into forum governance, we have a question in GIP 0001 regarding how to access the radical version. This is something that unfortunately has happened many times. It's still a little bit difficult to interact with radical. Hopefully it's solved. But yeah, that's about it for GIP 001. Going into the other stuff for governance, we have a comment in the Epoch Block Oracle GIP, which is a question regarding the requirement for new networks. This also eventually ended up with the creation of a new thread, which is a thread that wants to tackle and make more transparent the requirements and expectations for new networks to be added to the graph network, particularly to be added to the Epoch Block Oracle to enable indexing rewards. So those are really, really nice discussions going on there. So I would recommend anyone to go and take a look. Moving into forum research, no new updates since last IOH. And now moving into the contracts repository, there's been over 30 PRs opened and some closed for the contracts repository. I'm gonna be very brief. Most of them are fixes from the latest audit for new incoming features. There's also a few fixes here and there regarding some CLI issues, refactoring the graph runtime environment of the hard hat extension, some other changes to how we use safe math, as well as many different chores, mostly regarding to the CLI for deploying, and also some stuff related to how the local environment, the local hard hat environment works. So for the most part, it's a ton of PRs, mostly just fixes from audits, and also some chores here and there regarding how we use the CLI and improvements for the actual developers. But that's about it. Going into the network subgraphs, also no new releases since last IOH, and that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. And I'll handle it to Abel for the open discussion.
Thank you so much. So I'm very excited today to have this conversation. So as many of you in today's call know, we had a feedback session, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 2 IOHs ago. And many of you shared multiple pieces of feedback, which we are incredibly grateful for. And one of those pieces of feedback was to have a tighter, or to create the space for a tighter feedback loop between core developers and indexers. And today's episode is a step in that direction. So we're going to be talking about the Epoch Block Oracle, and I have folks for you in today's call who are as close to the metal as you could possibly be. We have Juan from GraphOps, we have Thiago and Filippo from Edgenode, who are all working on trying to make the Epoch Block Oracle a reality. And so without further ado, I would like to invite all of them to join today's conversation, and also invite Juan to bring us into the introduction of the conversation. So Juan, please take it away.
Thanks, Abel, for the quick introduction. So as some of you might know, and probably many of you remember, we've been discussing the Epoch Block Oracle for a while as part of, I think it was GAP 34. And it's being pretty far down in development. We're extremely close to having it somewhat ready, I would say. But people might have questions as to what is the Block Oracle, the Epoch Block Oracle, and what's the main function of it? Why are we even developing the Epoch Block Oracle? And I want to give a quick introduction as to what it is and why it is. So starting from what it is, the Epoch Block Oracle is like a multi-part system in a sense, which will take care of creating and managing data regarding the different start blocks for all of the epochs, for many different networks. So basically, the idea is it will be a solution to have some kind of like synchronization of the start blocks for all of the different chains that we are going to be indexing in the graph network, so that you can actually have a way to create verifiable POIs, verifiable in the same sense that it's being used right now, not actually verifiable indexing, but verifiable POIs, such that any indexer can know the start block that it's required to be used to generate a POI, to be able to contrast and verify that POI with any other POI that it's already submitted in the network. As many of you know, because most of you are indexers, that is exactly what we are doing right now with the Ethereum chain, so with mainnet. When you generate a POI, you submit the POI to L1, and then anyone else can verify it and be able to dispute it if they think the POI that you submitted is wrong or malicious. But that's only really possible with Ethereum right now, because it's the only one where we know which block to use for the POI generations. If we want to generate a POI for a different chain, we don't have a reference point, and this is like basically the spot that the EBO or Epoch Block Oracle wants to kind of like fix this kind of like issue, that we don't have a reference point for other networks. So the way that it works is it's a multi-part system. It's a ROS client. It's also a subgraph, and also it uses a set of contracts, which is the data edge, which we already covered here in IOH. And the interaction between those three parts of the system give you this. The end result would be this subgraph, which you can use to figure out which block you should be using to close an allocation for a subgraph that is not for Ethereum mainnet. Also for Ethereum mainnet, you can use it too, because eventually it's going to be the de facto way of using indexing rewards at all, like generating POIs at all. But the idea is that you will be able to have those reference points to be able to generate verifiable proof of indexing. Because otherwise, if you don't have the reference point, no one can really validate if that POI you generated is correct or not. So no one can actually, so the dispute mechanism would not work without those assumptions. So I think that's pretty much all for the introduction. I hope I wasn't too confusing with the explanation. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Abel now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So another part of the conversation that I'd like to bring to the forefront is the future of the Epoch Block Oracle. And for that, I would like to introduce Filippo and 𝗨𝘀𝗲 to speak to that. So guys, take.
Right. Thank you, Abel. Well, great introduction by Juan. Basically, the Epoch Block Oracle is a rather interesting piece of tech that will allow for multi-chain support and indexing rewards. And some of the design decisions indeed are precisely thinking about the future and how we can get even more decentralization in the future in regard to this particular piece of the architecture. So, 𝗨𝘀𝗲, I don't know if you want to shed some light on that.
I'm not sure on this section, are we supposed to talk about how do we see the Oracle in the future, or should we talk about how it's currently designed?
I guess how the design for the Epoch Block Oracle relates to the plans that we might have in the future. For example, the data. Well, let's start from the basics, really. The Rust client communicates to the subgraph the data and the block numbers that are supposed to be taken as a reference for the POIs by posting data on chain, right? And the decision to put that data on chain is indeed to support many more possibilities in the future to have further decentralization, because we don't want to rely on a centralized Rust client. So this is great already, but the design allows for having weighted voting or something like that directly on chain of block numbers, how to handle deep reorgs and stuff like that. So the design is quite future-proof, and we've seen it's relatively stable and robust. So we're very confident that it's going to be relatively easy to modify it and let it evolve in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on that. And yeah, currently the Oracle is being managed by Agent Node, and we're we are communicating every design decision and trying to translate this into GIPs, so the community is aware of the work we're doing, of how the Oracle operates, how the Oracle handles such maybe network issues and stuff. And yeah, I think at least my a personal wish is that the Oracle is maintained and run by multiple parties, not only Agile Node.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
we
would be
still have
ideal in the long run.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just want to make a smooth transition. So for now, we're focusing on having a single running block protocol.
Yeah.
But the design has this precise future direction in mind, with maybe the far future idea of having fully decentralized logic. But for now, we're just focused on having a single copy of the block protocol running, and then we're gonna implement, I guess, weighted voting and similar mechanisms that are supposed to allow multiple stakeholders in the space to run their own copies of the block protocol. So I guess we'll just see how it develops. For now, we're just very much focused on bringing the MVP live on mainnet.
Exactly. Yeah. Our current version, the first release of the block Oracle is just a Rust application run by Agile Node servers, and all it does is listens for the latest blocks on multiple JSON RPC providers and sends a message over the data edge to the epoch subgraph. That's, as Juan said, it's the ultimate goal of the Oracle, is to feed the epoch subgraph with the latest block of every chain during every epoch. So, which roughly equates to a day. An epoch equates to a day. So by the end of a day, the network will have pointers to what's the latest block on each chain that was produced by the Oracle. So the product that we're currently developing focus on being consistent and robust, so it should never fail a given epoch. So at the end of every epoch, we should have updated block pointers, so the network can make use and, for instance, close allocations, as Juan was explaining.
Yeah, and the next few things that we're going to focus on in regards to, future developments, since we're talking about that, is increased robustness. So we've been talking quite a lot about how to handle particular weird and challenging edge cases and situations that we might see. For example, maybe we might not get consistent data from some JSON RPC providers for a few chains, or we might face particularly deep reorgs that challenge the current design. In general, the whole system has to be particularly stable because we rely on it for indexing rewards. Just relying points of failure as much as we can, really.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that we were previously discussing that the main solution for most of the current failing points of the current Oracle implementation could be solved by decentralization. So how could we overcome like a bad JSON RPC provider or a bad set of RPC provider of block number providers? If we decentralize, if we have weighted voting, if we have a consensus mechanism around that, we could solve a lot of network or bad data issues, and that's where we are aiming for on the long run. So I think it's important for all the indexers to understand the current implementation. So there are risks associated of running a centralized app, as we all know. The first release of the Oracle will be a centralized one. We try to keep an eye on it constantly, so it doesn't fail, it doesn't have bad data, and whenever it happens, we will be ready to fix it. But yeah, the idea is how can we decentralize this as well. So it would be nice to hear from everyone else in the audience how they think, how they would architect such a solution. How do they think that multiple parties could contribute to updating the latest block numbers for a given epoch? So how would that work? How did the decentralized version of an oracle would look like? So that's one of challenges for the future. Yeah, and as Filippo said, we are currently focused on bootstrapping and this MVP, so we can get the network ready for multi-chain rewards. So, but yeah, I mean, the Oracle, the first step is not the last one, and I would really love to see the Oracle on a Rust application evolve into a more decentralized, and to make it become ethereal in the sense of making it, transforming some components into smart contracts, if that's possible. So.
Right. So I'd say, well, lots of information. Back to 𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗪, and I'm sure there's going to be questions. So if people have any, this is a great moment. Right.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of that context there. So, yeah, I guess like going into the open discussion section of this topic, is there any indexer in this room who is either indexing on other chains right now or has plans to? I'm curious to hear thoughts on that. So, yeah, either unmute your mic and just share. I see Kai's unmuted, so I'll let you.
So we're not actually running on multiple chains, but we've been talking about jumping onto Arbitrum or trying to index, but I don't know what's all there. Yeah, I know there's a couple of other indexers that we've talked to as far as getting onto other chains, what it would take. Right now, we're not really set with the resources to do that. We were looking at BSC as well, but the archive node requirements for that are astoundingly high. So yeah, we're not multi-network yet.
Yeah, we have RPCs running on multiple chains, and have been indexing other chains than Ethereum. So when it becomes available on the indexer mainnet, we're probably gonna go ahead with indexing multi-chain.
Amazing. I also see. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Derek, I think you were going to say the same thing. Derek from Data Nexus is stuck in the chat that they're anticipating and participating in the multi-chain mainnet. And he also asks, curious how interdependent the EBO would be. Say Solana goes down for a day, will other chains be affected in any way?
That's a great question. Chug and I have spent quite some time during recent weeks thinking precisely about this. And well, the current fundamental design of the EBO indeed is that you send a sequence of messages, you post them on chain, and messages can be, well, there can be a number of messages really, just with the sole purpose of achieving a clear consensus on the subgraph about what block numbers should be taken as reference for POIs. And the quite nice thing about this design is that if one single chain stop progressing, or we might have some problem with data providers, well, we can simply, actually, we don't have to do it because it's automatically basic. If there is some problem with the data inputs for a particular chain, then block updates for all the other chains, well, they go on without any problem, really. So they're quite unrelated. Yeah, anything I'm missing, Thiago?
No, I think that's precise because if a chain is responsive by any means, like Solana is down, so the Oracle effectively won't be able to get an update for what's the latest epoch on, or what's the latest block on Solana. And what would happen in the next week, let's say if this problem persists for longer than an epoch, the Oracle will just send a no update, a no update message to the epoch subgraph. So the latest block on Solana would be effectively the same as the previous epoch, and so on until it is back up again. And then for the future epochs, we will see an update on Solana, for instance, whenever it gets back up. So a chain being down doesn't really affect the Oracle operation. It just affects that the latest block for that chain wouldn't advance. And yeah, if it's a chain problem, like Solana is down, then there's really nothing to do. But the same could happen if a data provider fails to send us reliable block updates. So yeah, if that's the case, we can increase. We have plans for increased robustness by using multiple RPC providers for the same chain, and averaging out the latest block number. And yeah, by averaging out, it's not really an average; it's just more. It does some calculations to detect what's the block number that the Oracle should pick. But the idea is that we can try to overcome issues with data lack of data input on this sense, but there's nothing to do when a chain is down. But the effects are just that the block pointers won't advance for in that case.
I guess to follow up, so it's clear that any single supported chain being down does not affect the operation of the Oracle.
No,
but if we take
I just want to add that it doesn't affect the progression of the other chains as well. So if one chain is down, the others will continue to receive updates. That's all I had to say.
How would it affect the maximum epoch and reward distribution?
If a chain is down, then yes. When I say a chain is down, let's try to wrap that around that. If the epoch Oracle fails to detect the progression of block numbers on a chain, then yes, that will affect rewards distributions, because the epoch subgraph, which will ultimately be used to decide which blocks each chain were on the end of a given epoch, that information wouldn't progress because the Oracle didn't send an update for that chain. So in those cases, that's one point of failure, because if the Oracle fails to update the epoch subgraph, then all the network will see the past chain head for that chain, or the past block pointer for that chain. So it will be the same as the chain not advancing, or the rewards wouldn't be eligible. You couldn't close allocations on a block that is not listed in the epoch subgraph. So effectively, yeah, the block Oracle failure means that the epoch subgraph wouldn't receive updates for a given chain, or for a larger set of chains, if that's the case. And that's
the impact. Sorry, Tiago, just to kind of bring it to the indexer perspective, the impact of that data being unavailable is that you would not be able to close allocations for any subgraphs that are indexing data on that chain. And you'd effectively have to wait out the chain failure before you're able to close allocations with a non-zero POI.
So that's sorry, yeah, that's about correct. However, and one might have some perspective on this, but the idea is that for prolonged issues, we might indeed have a process in place to have governance basically step in so that we can still allow indexers to close allocation. And the process is going to have to be defined in the future. But basically, we're quite aware that this is a situation that we do not want to happen. And we're going to figure out ways to let governance step in that case. Am I mistaken, Juan?
Yeah, a few notes there. So the epoch block oracle will take care of generating the reference points for the POI generation. As Ford said, it just needs to be precise more than accurate. So as long as we can just create valid reference points, like, I mean, if Solana is not producing any blocks, it's valid to say that the same block should be used across different epochs. But there are a few edge cases where you might be like, you might, like, for example, what if the whole subgraph, like the epoch block oracle subgraph, crashes, or maybe the Rust client that's generating new data crashes, and we cannot figure out how to fix it in 1 or 2 days. We are missing epoch updates there. So in those cases, I guess one of the easiest ways to kind of like default would be to say, okay, the arbitration charter, because remember, we are still this still kind of like happens inside the dispute way of the dispute system. So in the sense that we still use POIs, we don't have verifiable indexing yet. It's just POIs and disputes. So within the same system, we have the arbitration charter, so we can define and the council can ratify in the arbitration charter what happens in those edge cases where there's no way to generate data for a number set of epochs. So for example, we could just default, as we have been doing lately, to, if there's no new epoch updates, default to the latest valid epoch. That could be one of the ways. It's not confirmed yet, it's not ratified yet, but there are many ways that are outside of the epoch block oracle to solve some of those edge cases that are not possible to solve with the technology itself. That's one of the aspects. And another of the aspects is rewards distribution is actually not handled with the epoch block oracle. The epoch block oracle, its only the only real thing that it needs to do is generate these reference points for each of the epochs, for each of the networks that are supported. I guess the reward distribution will come down to two things. One is the contracts themselves for the protocol. So basically curation kind of like splits the pie in terms of indexing rewards. The only thing that the epoch block oracle now allows us to do is to open up the distribution to non-Ethereum mainnet subgraphs, which that integration should probably be handled with the subgraph availability oracle, making sure that the subgraph availability oracle does not deny rewards for non-Ethereum mainnet. So it's it's kind of like an interoperation across a few oracles, which are the epoch block oracle and the subgraph availability oracle, as well as the protocol contracts, so that curation on non-Ethereum mainnet subgraphs can happen. Does that make some sense? I think, Coin, you were the one who asked for that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking on how to deal with this as well. It's coming around, and maybe I'm gonna say something incredibly stupid now, but what if the epoch block oracle would say submit at midnight UTC the last known block prior to that timestamp for every chain? So in that scenario, if a chain is halted or the RPC is not feeding or whatever, it would basically resubmit the same block for a second time or even a 10th time in a row. But it means that for every new epoch that is coming, there would always be a last block, and therefore the indexing process and the max allocation epochs, this kind of stuff wouldn't be interrupted.
Yes, the idea is not to interrupt the allocation process. If Solana is halted, for example, there's nothing we can do, so we can just keep submitting the same block. As long as that's the last known valid block, it's fine. Again, going back to what Ford said, it does not matter if it's accurate, like to the very block. If Solana produced one extra block after the hold and we have not picked up yet, or maybe it just happened at the same time we updated the epoch block oracle with a new message, new epoch, it doesn't matter if it's -1 + 1, -100 + 100, whatever. The only thing that it's important is that we have reference points for those POI generations. And the only real scenario where we would not be able to generate new epochs, or rather new reference point for new epochs, is when something within the epoch block oracle stack crashes catastrophically, and we cannot automatically recover from that. So we need to develop a fix, maybe update the subgraph or whatever. In those cases, we would default to the arbitration charter to make sure that the allocation process will not be interrupted. Because again, you have like strict limits as to when you start to become, you start to get some risk to be basically wiped, get your allocations wiped. So in that sense, the epoch block oracle should not be contributing to new edge cases where it could put indexers at risk at all. If the technology itself crashes, we will default to arbitration charter, again, social consensus. And if it's something that it's just particular to one chain or a few chains, if they are halted, we will just keep creating whatever amount, like new reference points with whatever amount of blocks have been able to be processed in those chains. It doesn't matter if it's just 0 blocks for like 5 epochs. If Solana is halted, Solana is halted. If Arbitrum is halted, Arbitrum is halted. It's not something that the indexers have to care about. And also, we have to keep in mind that indexers are not going to be just manually interacting with the epoch block oracle. The epoch block oracle should integrate pretty nicely with the indexer agent. This is, of course, not something that it's currently live. But eventually indexer agent will be able to pick up all of those intricacies. And even it could potentially be one step ahead and also pick up all of the arbitration considerations regarding what to do if there's no new epoch. Like if the latest valid epoch in the epoch block oracle is not the latest valid epoch in the network, what should the indexer agent do? I think as long as we have a ratified version of the arbitration charter, it should be pretty clear what it should do, and it should be pretty transparent to the indexer. So you should not be, you should not have to really consider that as some potential failure from your side, if that makes any sense.
It may already be obvious, but something that I think is worth clarifying is that even in the event of, some kind of oracle failure that, would prevent the generation of new POIs or whatever, none of this stuff affects the ability for the indexer to continue to serve queries and to continue to earn query fees. Obviously, if Solana halts, then, if that halt isn't kind of just a bug in the subgraph, in the epoch block oracle, like if the chain has in fact halted, then obviously indexing for that subgraph also would have halted. But you could still serve queries for historical data in that subgraph and still earn query fees for that.
Yeah, well said, Chris and Juan. And one thing I would like to add as well is in the epoch block oracle design, we have a special type of message that is to manually set given chain latest block. So as Juan said, if we are facing like catastrophic failure on the oracle side and the rest of the network components are still running fine, in theory, we could arbitration would still be able to interact with the epoch subgraph through these correct epoch messages. They should be used as a kind of last resort thing, but the interface used between the epoch block oracle and the epoch subgraph accounts for manually adjusting. Explicitly manually adjusting a new block pointer for such cases. So it was originally conceived to handle reorgs, but I think that even if the Oracle software is malfunctioning, those types of messages could still be sent, and manually and when I say manually, I said by arbitration decisions. It could elect a given block as the latest block for a given period, for a given epoch, and the rest of the network could move on with it. So
to add to what 𝗟𝗂 was saying, that's mostly for when the ROS client of the epoch block oracle has failures. Like if the actual service that we're running suddenly crashes and we cannot recover that and we need to set up a fix, we can always use the manual mode, if you will, to be able to send new data points for those new epochs while we are fixing the automatic service. But that also does not account for when the subgraph crashes, because that's a different kind of error. But again, all of those, given that it's an interconnected multi-system setup, it does require us to have kind of like plans for each of the individual components failing, as well as kind of like a massive catastrophic crash. Again, the one that I was discussing a little bit before, like defaulting to the arbitration charter, mostly only really happens if like everything dies and we cannot recover it within an epoch. Because if we can recover within an epoch, everything's fine. We don't have to default to anything. And indexers don't really have to do anything differently, because they will just keep using the indexer agent, ideally. Again, and as long as the indexer agent and the epoch block oracle are well interconnected, everything should be fine, and it should be producing valid POIs within the in accordance to the arbitration charter, right?
Yeah, just to check, so the data flow is RPCs, then epoch oracle, it's on chain, and then it's indexed to a subgraph from that chain, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah, precisely.
Yep. Go for it, Joe.
Yeah, I would. The way that the Oracle sends messages, it's through the data edge contract, and yeah, it pulls data from the JSON RPC providers, decodes them to be processed, to be put into a message, and they send that message to the data edge contract. All the specs are open source, so anyone could also check the messages that the Oracle sends to the data edge contract, and then the subgraph is indexing the data edge contract, looking for those messages, and as soon as it detects a new message sent to the data edge contract, it indexes, decodes the message, and process all the relevant information. So the epoch subgraph will keep track of all the sent messages, if it's regular update networks message, or if it's exceptional correct epoch message. It will be transparent to everyone who wants to check what happened, and all the data flow is stored, persisted in the subgraph as well. Juan has been doing an amazing job developing the epoch subgraph, so it's extremely detailed. So you can even query for what's the current what's the latest epoch, and what's the latest block number for a given chain on a given epoch, and you can also inspect the raw payload that the Oracle sent on the message, which you can then track back to the transaction and just see if it's the same thing. So it's really the subgraph is extremely reliable on that sense. And yeah, the way of sending of injecting the latest block numbers of foreign chains into a network, into a chain, in this, it's exactly that. So it's JSON RPC providers, then block oracle, then the data edge contract, and then the epoch subgraph.
A small side note, there's a vote going on in the stage chat in case anyone wants to participate. Just sorry for interrupting, Coin.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if it's already chosen on which chain this contract would live, and B, once we get to the point of decentralization, whether part of the decentralization is running the same contract on different chains.
The contract, you mean the contract that the subgraph is reading from?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the data edge contract that is living in Ethereum. It doesn't really, it can live in any chain, to be honest. It's just on Ethereum because it's the chain that we kind of like use for all of the contracts. But technically speaking, as long as it can just keep receiving the messages from any of the Rust clients that are running some of those JSON RPCs, it should be able to live whatever we want. Like choosing Ethereum is because everything is in Ethereum right now. I don't think this particular approach would work if we have many different data edge contracts in many different chains, because you don't have like a single source of truth for the different values. Like kind of like it needs to be a single source of truth. But there are like, if maybe your concern is that it might be too expensive in some point in the future. Again, this is using data edge contract. Data edge is quite future-proof in the sense that it does offload all of the computation to the subgraph. So the only thing that data edge does is it receives a payload. Everything that is executed there, it's actually executed in the subgraph. So it's as cheap as it can get on L1. It should not be there should not be any concerns around like whether it would be way too expensive to keep sending messages, because it's as cheap as it can get again.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the concern of the availability. Imagine that Ethereum itself would stall for, I don't know, for a while because of a hard fork, because of the migration to proof of stake, whatever reason there is, that Ethereum itself is the chain that becomes halted. It was more from that perspective. Then, of course, there is the cost, but you already answered that. But more the sense of the availability of the data.
If needed, it could be deployed to a different network. I think mostly Ethereum is the least likely network to hold. That's why it's living here. But again, like if this is kind of like an outside of the scope of the block oracle itself, but I guess it's a very interesting question. I guess if Ethereum ever holds, governance would probably step in and kind of like redeploy this in a different network. Adam, you unmuted. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think one additional consideration there is that even if the chain did hold, that obviously has some impact on the data, on the freshness, I guess, of the data that Index would be closing allocations with. But you would still be able to continue Index and continue closing allocations. You just use that latest the latest sort of block from the subgraph, so it wouldn't sort of halt the protocol. And yeah, so then I guess it would then just be a matter of after how much time a redeployment was felt to be necessary. But yeah, I think Juan covered that sort of recovery path.
We don't have much time, but I noticed a poll that Chris put up that has been voted on quite a bit about the direction of the conversation we could take, and a path to decentralize the right layer came up as number one. We have a short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of frame that. Yeah, so I guess actually, Filippo, I think at the beginning of the conversation you said that some design considerations had been made to accommodate a path to decentralizing the Oracle in the future. And yeah, just as succinctly as you can, what do you think that path looks like? You kind of alluded to multi-party voting, perhaps on a particular message.
Yes.
How are you guys thinking about that?
Indeed. So the design allows, I wouldn't say trivially, but quite easily as a future direction of this, to allow multiple copies of the block oracle, Rust instance, the program, the application that provides the data that we then submit on chain, quite easily allows for weighted voting on which messages are normative, so which messages actually constitute the data that would then get picked up by the subgraph, so the indexer agent, and ultimately used to close allocations. So that's the most immediate way that I can think of as a possibility of future path towards decentralization, and it's something that we've been keeping in mind. And it's something that I would personally like to see, and I think there's quite some interest in doing that in the far future. Now, another option might be to use there's no point really in going any deeper than that because it's something that we don't have currently. But I would say that's the next step, and the design allows for that, and it's something that we want to get done eventually.
Cool, thanks. Do you see a path? I mean, I could imagine, when you have parties voting on something, you need to attribute some weight to their vote. And if the set is permissioned, then, you can kind of use social reputation. But if that obviously comes with trust assumptions. If, however, longer term, we want to move to a more decentralized model, I could imagine that you could actually have indexers function in this role. And obviously,
the amount of staking that they have across all subgraphs for a particular network, right? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, precisely. Like reusing the on-chain notion of identity and Sybil resistance to, attribute vote weighting in this kind of Oracle context.
Yes, it's something that I'm personally very excited about, and it's something that the design allows for, and we'll see how it goes. But if I were a betting man, that's going to be the ultimate direction of the whole thing.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, excited for that. And I feel like there's a little bit of theoretical overlap with some of the stuff we're doing with the Gossip Network. So excited to talk to you more about that. Back to you, 𝗡𝗂.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I want to do two things. One is I would like to solicit feedback from the wider community about topics we could potentially cover for future IOHs. So if you want to go ahead into the stage chat or unmute your mic, feel free to shout in terms of potential future topics we could cover. And of course, if nothing comes to mind right now, I've just popped in a small form that you're able to fill out that you can kind of write down those topics. But yeah, key to hear people's thoughts on future episodes. Or topic idea, use cases for something like the Gossip Network. Okay, I love that. That is something we've been thinking about internally. So yeah, keen to share more about that. Please, more. Would love to hear more.
Well, some more just soliciting ideas from the community, like what sort of problems have people come across in the recent, 6 months of you guys operating an indexer? Like, one of the things I run across is, well, how long does it take to sync a subgraph from zero to chain head? So, I mean, that's one use case. Happy to hear any other ideas, any problems that you guys try to solve, like either through discussion on Discord or even just manually, where we could introduce some automation or information exchange vis-a-vis the Gossip protocol.
Yeah, super excited to have that some dedicated time in a future episode to dig into that kind of thing. I do think that's a great way of thinking about it or approaching it, is just operationally, what do I have to turn to Discord for? I think a great example is like the whole what's it called, this subgraphs health channel, which I know we all frequent and kind of exchange subgraph failures in. That's something that we can readily automate using something like the Gossip Network. So yeah, thanks, Kai, and excited to chat more.
Amazing. So with that, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you to every single person who has joined us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. A big special shout out to Juan, Filippo, and Tiago for leading the conversation. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Before we wrap up, I'm going to share the POAP code. So it is all lowercase, 4-hold-camera. That's 4-hold-camera. So that's the POAP code. You should be able to get the POAP. Again, thank you all for attending today's IOH. And please do, if you have anything that comes to mind, fill out the form. It's literally one field that's required, which is like, what topics would you like to hear next? So yeah, keen to hear your responses. And with that, I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.